guys, welcome back to my channel, and we are going to be doing Dinner with Nikki, the True Crime Edition. So let's get started. Tonight we are going to be eating Jimmy John subs, barbecue chips, and this lovely delicious beer. This is BrewDog Elvis juice. It is, I can't remember where it's brewed. It's brewed in the US, but it's actually, I think it was like originally started in Scotland. This is an IPA. It is 6.5%, and it is made with grapefruit juice. I totally enjoy IPAs. I used to not, but they've grown on me. As I try to keep them, 6.5% is about as high as I'll go. Maybe 7 because they can definitely sneak up on you. But this one is super good, and it's not too bitter, which I like. I don't like the ones that taste like hairspray or like are so incredibly bitter. So I have barbecue chips, and then my vegetarian sub with I add sprouts, and I also add extra hot peppers. And I do their oil and vinegar on it as well. And I think this is number 13. I think that's the veggie one. They might have 2. I can't remember. So we are going to dig in, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this is going to be our true crime dinner. Okay? I decided to do this true crime edition is because I love true crime. It is something I'm super into. And I thought that I would kind of get bored just talking to you guys about like everyday life, because honestly, day to day, my life is like quite boring. I mean, I go to work Monday through Friday from 7:45 till 3:30, and I come home, we go to the gym, we eat dinner, we hang out with our dog. Like, that's it. I'm not going to like cool blogging events or anything because we don't have them where I'm at. I'm not like, I don't have like a ton of stuff going on, especially in the winter. So I thought like a great way, whoa, that pepper was incredibly spicy. Holy shit. Oh my God. I thought a good way to bridge the gap of not having a topic would be to kind of share my new, well, old, but new love of true crime. I listen to true crime podcasts all the time, probably more than I listen to music now. I listen to them when I work out. I have caught up on every single true crime podcast that I fall in love with, to the point where now I'm having to wait until new episodes come out each week. This dog's been driving me crazy. True crime, like, is kind of huge right now, which it sounds terrible, and I think people that don't enjoy true crime kind of get a bad rap, like, they have a bad idea about it. It's not like we're, like, cheering for murder. It's more of a fascination, I think, about, like, just human nature and people that kind of break societal norms. I'm in the field of psychology, so understanding why people do things is fascinating to me. And I think the answer is usually we just don't really have a reason or an explanation for why people do things. But I think true crime really gets at the center of, like, is there an inherent evil within people? Are you made into a killer or a murderer? Are you created? Are you born that way? Is it genetic? Like, there's all these like psychological questions. So like that's how I got fascinated into it. I also love any type of puzzle or mystery. So true crime is kind of like a real life puzzle. Like you have to solve it, and I'm always in my head like trying to think one step ahead about what's about to happen, or who the murderer is, like what the outcome is going to be, and like sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. So yeah. So I thought that this would be a fun way, because it's so popular too. I know other people enjoy it, and it would give me a way to kind of do these dinners with you where I'm not just babbling on about like, oh, today went shopping at Marshall's, and do you guys like Marshall's? So, we're doing that true crime thing. I literally have notes on my Google Drive. Like, I've spent days researching this. I am going to try and do Michigan-based cases, but I'm sure I'll eventually have to branch out from that. If you guys have a favorite true crime case, or if you have something that you think would be a good one to do for our Dinner with Nicky True Crime Edition series, then definitely let me know and leave a comment below. Okay, so the crime we are doing today is the Hart murders, or the Robeson Family murders. So the reason I chose this is because Hart, Michigan, where this took place, is about 15 miles, if that, north of where our cabin is located in Harbor Springs. So Hart, Michigan is a really small, tiny little town. It's on the coast of Lake Michigan, and it's in the upper northwest part of the lower peninsula. So it's up here, the very tip of the northwest corner. So I thought it was kind of like a good one to start with because we talked about the cabin, and now I'm going to talk about this case that happened literally just up the street. Google how you would say their last name. So it's Robeson. Okay, so the Hart murders. In 1968, July of 1968, a neighbor to the Robeson's cabin had contacted their caretaker to let them know that there was this awful smell coming from their cabin. The caretaker, ironically, is actually who built the house. So him, and I think I read that it was him and his father, actually designed and created a bunch of these homes that you can still probably see up in northern Michigan today. Because the design is still pretty popular. It kind of, I mean, it looked like any other Michigan cabin. But he eventually became the caretaker and kind of helped out with the cabin because it was just a summer home. So on or around July 22nd of 1968, he got a call that he needed to check out this cabin. So he went over to the cabin, and when he got there, the doors were locked and the windows were locked, which isn't unusual. I mean, when we leave our cabin, we obviously lock it up. But when he went around the cabin, or he paid closer attention or looked more in more detail, he found or noticed that one of the windows was cracked and broken. So he went back to the door and basically broke into the house. When he broke in, he immediately found a body laying on the ground. And there was Shirley Robeson, who at the time was 40 years old. She was dead, laying in a pool of blood on her stomach, and was covered in a blanket from her knees up. Obviously, he realizes that something awful has happened. The house is described as being like covered in blood. There's pools of blood, including the one that Shirley is laying in, or, you know, where she's passed away. and there's drag marks. He can see drag marks as well. And so I'm not sure if he went in to look for more of the family or if he just called the police. I'm sure it's in my notes. I can't remember. But the caretaker came and then called the police, and the police came and found the rest of the family. So the family members included Richard Robeson, the father, who was 42, Shirley, who he saw right when he walked in, who was 40, Richie, the oldest son, who was 19, Gary, who was 16, Randy, who was 12, and Susan, who was only 8 years old at the time. All 6 family members were deceased, and oh man, it appeared to the police and the investigators that they had been dead for quite a while. So when they went to check out the bodies, they noticed that the decomposition of the bodies was extremely far along. But they also realized that the heat in the cabin had been turned up extremely high. Now, if you're familiar with Michigan, or you're not familiar with Michigan, you know that we have the craziest weather in the Midwest. In the winter, we can have it as cold as -20, but in the summer, we can have it as warm as 105. Up north, it's a little bit cooler, especially on Lake Michigan, because you have that lake breeze, but in the middle of July, to turn the heat up in a house, I cannot even imagine how warm it was. And supposedly it was set extremely high too, like it was up really, really warm. From the thermostat. So this obviously was an intentional move because it caused the bodies to decompose faster than they would if the heat wasn't on. Obviously, they decompose quickly or break down quickly because of it being summer anyway and it not being cold. But this obviously just quickened the process. It was also noted that Richard the father had actually been specifically drugged. I don't know. And those were the marks that they could find. And he was actually placed over the vent specifically so that he would decompose at like the fastest. All the family members had been shot. That's how they were killed. Except for the fact that Shirley and their daughter Susan were also beaten with a hammer. And that claw hammer was actually found on the scene. When they searched the properties, they didn't find any guns, but they found a footprint, they found the hammer, they found, what else? I think that might be it. That were discovered in the investigation, they determined that the family had actually been dead for about 27 days, they suspected, based on the last day that they had been seen by somebody outside of their cabin. I think there were tree trimmers that had been around the area where those cabins were, and they had reported seeing them. But then after that, they had no longer had any witnesses that came forward saying they had seen the Robeson family. So based on that, they had been dead at least 27 days, or around 27 days. They had suspected that Shirley may have been sexually assaulted based on how her body was posed. But because of the level of decomposition and because it was 1968, they weren't really able to get any tests done on her to prove that or disprove it. So the theory is that either she was probably sexually assaulted or the killer, murderer, laid her out that way specifically to send the investigation down that road, maybe to take the eye off of him or her for pistol. So the theory is that the gunman or the killer actually shot through the window first, and that's why those broken pieces of glass were found and why the window was shattered. Shot Richard, the dad, through the window, hit him, then came in, ambushed them all in the family. I don't know, maybe he like pistol whipped him or hit him with the butt or end of the gun because he did have some head trauma, and then shot him in the head with the .25 caliber pistol, and then obviously took out the rest of them. They had 4 leads in regards to potential suspects. Some of them are a little far-fetched, but I'm going to talk to you about all of them. Richard was knowingly having some financial troubles, and they hypothesized that potentially maybe he owed money to people, and that's why the family was murdered. Kind of like, you know, like a mob hit or something. But Nina says this in her podcast. It doesn't really make sense. Like, there's not really like a mob in northern Michigan. Like, northern Michigan is, especially in 1968, was probably even more desolate than it is now, and it's already still probably like considered for some people pretty out in the middle of nowhere. And so for a mob person to like, or group to drive all the way up 4.5 hours away from Detroit to murder him and his family seems unlikely. Seems logical. Like, why kill his whole family unless they threatened him with the family, I suppose. But it just doesn't really make a ton of sense. Like, they could just come get him at work. They could get him back in Detroit and still kill his family there. Like, it just doesn't really add up. And Nina talks about that as well, being her opinion that she just doesn't feel like it makes a lot of sense. But it was something that I guess was thrown on the table or considered at the time because he was having these financial issues. The next logical suspect was the caretaker himself. The caretaker's name, Mr. Bliss. He was the one who found the bodies, which automatically makes you a suspect. If you're into true crime, you know, if you find a body, be prepared to answer questions. Because it's a rare thing to find dead bodies, you know? So, oh, well, hello. Abby just jumped on the couch. So, obviously, they looked at him. He had access to the house. He knew the Robeson family. He probably knew how much money they made or the fact that they were wealthy. And it's reported that his son was actually family friends with that Robeson. I keep thinking I'm saying that wrong. Mr. Bliss, the caretaker, volunteered to take a lie detector. I actually think he took 2 lie detectors, and he still was, he passed both of them. He was a suspect. People bring up that he has a claw hammer because he's a carpenter. He was the one, like I said at the beginning of this video, he actually built the house. But like Nina says this too, everybody has a claw hammer. Like, we have hammers. We have hammers in this house and in the cabin, like in our garage, in our basement. There's hammers everywhere. So like, that's not really a reason enough to tell somebody that they're a murderer. But I guess it was added to the list of reasons why he could be a murderer. Unfortunately for Mr. Bliss, something really tragic happened, and his son ended up passing away due to a drinking and driving accident. Reportedly, Richard Robeson came over to give his condolences and actually gave the family money because he couldn't attend the funeral and bring flowers. There are people who say that this could have enraged Mr. Bliss, or he could have just been so distraught and had been drinking because he was so upset about his son's passing that he could have kind of had a freak out moment and done something terrible because supposedly he did drink and kind of get a little loose. Ultimately, he's ruled out as a suspect, found not guilty. This third potential suspect is the one that I think is the craziest, because when I thought about doing a true crime dinner, this is the guy I was going to do. But the serial killer, John Norman Collins, was put up as a potential murderer. The potential murderer. John Norman Collins was a serial killer around the same time who had killed a bunch of Eastern Michigan college women. And the craziest part of this, when I was doing this research, is that the reason he was suspected is that he was Canadian born, as was Mr. Richard Robeson. And they both went to EMU, and actually reports say they were acquaintances or more than acquaintances, which means friends or like they hung out or something. Lie down. Down. So, there was like this suspicion that somehow the serial killer John Norman Collins somehow like had some beef or like issue with Richard's family and then came and killed them. But ultimately, as not cool, it's a bad word, as crazy as that would be of a connection, because who would ever think that? It just wasn't really his MO. His MO was college-age girls. He was into like bondage, and he was extremely brutal to the females that he murdered and raped, and he engaged in like post-mortem brutality to their bodies, and that just wasn't something that was seen at this particular crime scene. So he was ruled out by law enforcement pretty early on, but still I thought, when I read that, I was like, holy smokes, the first book I ever read that got me into true crime. That wasn't just like a murder mystery that you'd read by like Mary Higgins Clark. This was like a legit book. I got it in college, and it was called Michigan Murders, and the copy I got was literally still one of the most original, one of the original copies from the 1970s when it was written, or early 1980s. And it was written about John Norman Collins and how the investigation went. And there's been some updates since that book was written, because obviously it was written during a time where DNA was just coming out and all these, advancements in science. But it like shook me to the core, because I feel like for me that was my first understanding of kind of like that serial killers often, targeted women, and that they did these things to them, and it just kind of made it real. And I was in college, but I was fascinated by it, and so I was like, I remember thinking like, I'm going to find all the true crime books that I can find, but then I thought, well, if I start researching every serial killer book that we have at the Western Michigan Library, they might flag my account. And so then I got distracted by studying and partying, and my true love of crime kind of went on the back burner until I rediscovered the ID Discovery Channel and Dateline and all that kind of stuff. Suspect is Richard's employee, Joseph Gallardo III. And Joseph got flagged as a potential suspect, or got flagged as a suspect, was because employees, when they found out that the family had been murdered, reported that Joseph and Richard had gotten into an argument earlier before the family had traveled up north. And they argued about the fact that Joseph supposedly had stolen a bunch of money. Red flag immediately, right? Like, guilty. So, when the police started looking into him even more, they found out that he had stolen money from them. And actually, Shirley's mom, or the grandma, called the office and was asking if the office had heard from Richard or Shirley because she couldn't get a hold of them. Well, guess who answers the phone and takes the call and tells them that everything's fine. They had heard from them and everything was good. Joseph. Joseph gets transferred the call because Richard's gone. Nobody can find him. And he takes the call because he's like the next man in charge. And he reports to Shirley's mother that he had just talked recently to Richard and that the family was fine. They were just up north. So, huge red flag because the police know when they were most likely killed versus what day this grandma called looking for her daughter and their family. So, not good things for him. When they looked into what he was doing, they found that he was filling out pre-written checks, but he was making them out for more money than what he was supposed to. And he was like giving people raises at work, like his friends at work, raises that he didn't get approved. And I'm guessing that this is why they were in financial trouble, like I stated at the beginning, for the potential reason there was a mob hit on him, was that this man was like stealing all this money from him. So, this is where they ask Gallardo, they pull him in, and they give him a lie detector test. And we know lie detector tests nowadays, we know they're not like really very accurate. And honestly, they're not even admissible in court anymore, I don't believe. So, everyone says don't take one. But this guy doesn't fail just one, he fails two. He provides the police with alibis for where he was, and the police find out that he was lying. Probably the biggest one for me, or one of the biggest things for me, aside from him telling the grandma that they were fine, when they look back into his accounts and finances, they found that he had just purchased both of those guns, the .22 caliber and the .25 caliber. He reported to the police that he gave the .22 caliber gun away, as well as the .25 caliber. He said he sold them or got rid of them. But a neighbor actually confirmed to the police and told the police that he had seen it at Joseph's house shortly before the murders were to take place. I guess there's some issues with this timeline too, like, I don't have it written down, but like, he gave these alibis, but like the timeline of how long it would take him to get up north and everything, like they could fit, or I'm not sure. But also it sounds like his alibis were just bogus anyway. They ended up finding out that Gallardo's father actually owned ex-father-in-law, father-in-law owned a gun range. So they went and identified casings from bullets that matched the bullets at the scene. So they investigated him for a really long time. The investigation took a long time. There was they didn't have any like smoking gun proof, right? They had all this evidence. They had the 22 caliber guns, the they had the 22 caliber and the 25 caliber gun, which they know he had recently purchased. The claw hammer that they found at the scene, they ended up not being able to pull any prints from it because their theory is that potentially when it was being picked up with like a rag or a cloth, that prints got wiped off, so they couldn't pull anything from it. The guns were never found, but there were no prints lifted from the hammer. Because the heat was turned up so high, they weren't able to pull any, they weren't able to really pull any DNA off of the bodies. They tried and they saved it for later in case, you know, like our testing could get better, which it has, but it still wasn't really good enough to use, at least not at this point in our lives. Actually, their greatest suspect is Gallardo, and he's pretty fucking guilty. They are waiting to get more significant evidence so that they know that they can like really get him and get a conviction. It's a couple of years that it takes to do the investigation, and then right before they're gonna get him and arrest him and make an arrest or get a warrant out for his arrest, Gallardo commits suicide, which this occurred in 1973. He left a note and basically continued to claim his innocence, stating that he did not murder the Robeson family, and that while he did steal and, you know, was like a shitty person, that he wasn't a murderer. So a couple updates before we're done. In 1975, 2 years after Gallardo kills himself and commits suicide, a blue 1965 Chevy is found abandoned on M14. Now, for understanding, because the tunnel of trees and where this cabin was on M19, but M19 is all the way up here. M14 is like mostly down here in Ann Arbor, and maybe it goes all the way north. I don't believe so, though. I'm fairly certain that M14 is pretty much located in this lower southeast Michigan area. So they find an abandoned blue Chevy car, and the police come and they want to try and find who this car belongs to. So as they're searching through everything inside the car, they find that there is a luggage tag in the glove box, and that luggage tag has Shirley Robeson's name on it. They try and track down through owners of the car who this person could have possibly been. They had multiple owners, and eventually they just couldn't track it down. There's a couple theories about this. Some feel like once the family had been laid to rest, the house was auctioned off and like they had an estate sale. So some just assume that a person bought luggage from this estate sale because it was around that area, and 14 isn't that far away from where they had lived, and potentially just ripped the luggage tag off and threw it in their glove box and forgot about it. Or 3, they took evidence back out of storage so that they could retest the DNA and see if they had any other evidence that in 1970 they couldn't really do anything with, but then maybe now, because of advancements in science, could help really solidify that Gallardo or somebody else really did the murder. Unfortunately, the DNA was just too degraded, or they just weren't able to pull it off because, again, at the time the bodies had been so decomposed, they weren't able to really get much. Then we come to October of 2018, which was only a couple of months ago. A retired teacher from the area who was like pretty dedicated to the case, he reported that he had won a magazine from the company that Richard was the president for. He won it via a radio contest, and that when this all happened, he just always felt like he had this connection with this guy because of this magazine subscription he had. So, what was his name? Richard Wiles. Got a lot of Richards. So he felt, not just him, I think him and probably some ex-investigators or retired investigators felt that the case was like pretty open and shut. That they had enough information to determine that it was Gallardo, and that Gallardo had really murdered the family because he didn't want anyone to find out about the money he had been stealing, and he really didn't want Richard to eventually, I'm assuming, come back to get the money back from him or sue him or fire him. So he killed the entire family. So in 2018, they had this big presentation. Richard Wiles, the retired teacher, again, I think a retired investigator, they presented all their evidence on the case to the public and basically have come out and said that it is a closed case. So this family of 6 who was up just trying to have a vacation for the summer and enjoy their cabin up north in Good Hart, Michigan, were brutally murdered, all because an employee of their father had decided to steal what wasn't his and $60,000 or more and didn't want to get caught. So that is the Good Hart murder, or the Robeson family murders. So thank you guys again for joining me, and I look forward to doing this again with you next time. I'm not sure what I'm running already out of ideas for food, but I have a couple up my sleeve that I'm excited to do. But I also would love to hear if you have like food places that you want me to check out. I know you don't know where I'm at really per se, but if you do, that's, just let me know. Have a fantastic holiday. If this goes out before Christmas, Merry Christmas. If not, you will see it shortly after the new year. We will be going up north, of course, and skiing and doing fun things like that. So I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful holiday, and that we get to start off the new year with a bang, okay? Thank you guys again for all of your support, and I cannot wait to have dinner with you again. Stay hungry.